Thank you all. Good evening. Good evening.
Good evening.
Ooh, there we go. There we go. Mel and I were in the back tormenting my older brother, my brother Wade back there as well, who will at some point see you as a current serving district court judge. So ask him the really hard questions, Julie, after you have that training. Make sure he's the first one up. So, with the various candidates that are here, I see a lot of folks. You are to be applauded for coming forward, putting your name out on the ballot, standing up before folks and telling people what you believe. That is hard business, and it's to be applauded. There's something else I notice in the crowd, or I should say I notice that is not in the crowd. Anybody notice what's not in the crowd tonight? Well, besides that, there are no jars of urine and no bottles of feces to be thrown at me. So the next time somebody tells you those Tea Party types are really bad people, yeah, there weren't any Tea Party folks in the gallery in the Senate the evening of July 25th or June 25th. So, I very much appreciate the opportunity to join you. Julie asked me to speak as a remembrance of September 11th. So I'll tell you a little bit about the personal story. I will not share graphic pictures with you, but I will share some of the graphic details. And then take question and answers after I tell you a great story of the Lord's grace. Are you ready? Situated? All right, let me get my shooting iron here, and we'll be ready to go. On Wednesday, we will celebrate, not the right word, recognize the 12th memorial of September 11th. There are times that it seems longer than 12 years ago, and there's times it seems, just a year or two ago. The morning of September 11th, I am assigned as a lieutenant colonel in the Pentagon on the Army staff in the Assistant Chief of Staff for Installation Management's office. I am the military aide, the Deputy Assistant Chief of Staff in that directorate, so I'm an aide to the deputy. That's just a really nice big title for Chief Donut Getter, because as a lieutenant colonel in the Pentagon, you're nothing more than what Charlton Heston was chained to his oar in the movie Ben-Hur, and the general's got the whip, the whole 9 yards. We keep you alive to serve this ship. Yeah, you know the deal. My tag team XO, Colonel Williams, was a full colonel, and he was the aide to General Van Antwerp. That morning, I got into the building at 6:30 and in uniform, ready to go about my duties no later than 7 o'clock, waiting for the boss to get in and make Jan's day efficient. That was my primary function. Just as Colossians says, to serve your earthly masters as if serving the Lord. Got them out of the building over to the DoubleTree for the conference that our staff director was hosting, and so it was just Cheryl, Sandy, and myself remaining in the office at about 8:15 through the remainder of the day, as General Van Antwerp, Miss Mittig, and Colonel Williams were over at the DoubleTree with all the garrison commanders we had brought in from around the world that command Army installations. 9 o'clock, Sandy gets a call from her daughter Sam up in New York, says, "Hey Mom, turn the TV on, the World Trade Center's been hit by a plane." And we did what everybody here in Tarrant County was doing and around the world, and that's turning on TVs or getting that first phone call or radio report, whatever it may be, that first notification that there's a major catastrophe going on up in New York. Went into Miss Minnie's office, turned the TV on, see the North Tower with the antenna mast, that huge gaping hole, and with the beautiful blue sky, still a summer day. It's clear that weather was not part of this, and while we thought this, and the flight of U.S. Air with Captain Sullenberger landing in the Hudson had not yet occurred, there was just that little voice in the back of our minds when you see the size of that hole, realizing that if I were a pilot, and many of our American carrier-based pilots are former military, if I had a major calamitous malfunction, I would do what Captain Sullenberger did, and that's put it in the water and avoid as many people as I could. And so in looking at the building and going, golly, that little voice in the back of our head is just saying, this doesn't smell right. Praying it's an accident, but there's that voice telling us this isn't really that way. And in short order, we would watch Flight 175 on live TV crash into the South Tower nearly 600 miles an hour, and that would confirm that neither were accidents. Knelt down, prayed, and just asked for the Lord to guide the folks in New York, both those in the towers above the crash sites, those below, and then our first responders that were going to respond to such a constricted city and the difficulty of maneuver with so many folks responding to such a calamitous event. I'd had my morning Coke that morning at 6:30, so that by 7 o'clock I can be at ramming speed. We all need that jolt of caffeine first thing in the morning. And I'd had my morning Coke, and it was now time to make my morning trip to the restroom. I told Sandy and Cheryl that I was going to step out, go to the men's restroom. I'd be back momentarily. And those are the last words that I would speak to my two co-workers. Went to the restroom, stepped out. It was about 7 or 8 steps out when Flight 77 is deliberately crashed into the Pentagon at the intersection of the fourth quarter and the E-ring. And so that you understand what a miracle it is that it is by God's grace that I'm still standing here. I brought just a few photos with me, so let's see if this thing works here. All right, 5-sided puzzle palace. Let me orient you real quickly. Let me stand over here so that y'all can see. The most dangerous thing in the United States military is a soldier. The most dangerous thing in the Pentagon is a lieutenant colonel with a laser pointer. So let me make sure my gunnery skills are good here. There we go. The courtyard that you see at the top of the screen, the ring that's most immediately around that is the A ring. There are, of course, 5 rings, A, B, C, D. The E ring being the outermost ring. That's for everybody that's got a window office. I'm here to tell you, a window office is not all it's cracked up to be, okay? There are spokes called corridors that connect each of the rings. This is corridor 4, corridor 5. There are 10 corridors. The aircraft makes penetration at the intersection of the fourth corridor and the E-ring at about a 45-degree angle and makes penetration through the E, D, and C rings. So 3 of the 5 rings are penetrated. The plane makes impact, and as it does, it peels kind of like the way you would begin to peel a banana. At the top, you peel it back, the nose of the fuselage begins to peel, and in fact what happens is the plane turns inside out, similar to as you would take a long sleeve shirt off, and when you take the shirt off, you pull the sleeve and turn it inside out. The plane is right side in, makes impact with the building, and it turns inside out with the tail making deepest penetration. The flight data recorder and the voice recorder were recovered in the C-ring area, so the tail makes deepest penetration of the building. Mel knows that this is my side of the building because the helipad is right here, and in fact this little building right there is the air traffic control tower for the Pentagon's helipad. Just a couple of months prior, when we had changed offices and moved from Wedge 2 up here on this side of the building in that E-ring, we moved to this side in the newly renovated area. And again, being the lieutenant colonel, the lowest guy on the totem pole, guess who unpacks the boxes from the move? That's me. And Mel joined me that Saturday, watched it rain on the helipad. So as she's watching the Pentagon burn on TV, she doesn't know which window is mine, but she knows one of those windows is my window. This picture was taken by Officer Garcia, the Pentagon's Force Protection Agency, the Pentagon's Police Department, just a few moments after impact. The red X that you see on the right-hand side delineates the nose of the aircraft penetration point. In fact, you can see a little bit of the arc of the aircraft in the outer limestone of the building. The dashed circle shows you where the left engine makes penetration of the building. There's very little support here. In fact, none holding the building up. The vertical line is the expansion joint. If you recall that picture of the video of the Pentagon, that portion that crumbles, as you're looking at it and you see it break cleanly off on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side it remains hinged. This is the left-hand side of the building. Everything to the right of that line is what will collapse 27 minutes later, and then everything to the left of the line is what will still remain standing. The solid circle is my window, that's where my desk was located, and then the window here is Miss Minnick's office, where Sandy and Cheryl and I were watching events unfold and where their remains would be found 2 to 3 days after the fire is put out. Another picture by Officer Garcia, this time just a few moments before the collapse of the portion of the Pentagon, that E-ring portion. You can see the large center impact holes getting larger as the building is burning, the fire, there's continual crumbling of debris. So the penetration hole is getting larger and larger till at some point the building can no longer hold the weight of the third, fourth, and fifth floors. Similar physics of what happened at the World Trade Center. There came a point that the structures couldn't hold the weight that was above it. The window that I'm in fact behind at the time of impact is just off the screen. You've got column 18 here. There is, this all will collapse at the 27-minute mark, and just to the right, what will still remain standing, I'm behind the window just to the right off the screen. This is a picture that was put together by Deputy Attorney General McNulty and the prosecution of Zacharias Moussaoui. I guess it's going on, what, 6 years or 7 years now since that happened. It is the artist rendering of the 757 making penetration of the building with the complete outer facade of the E-ring, where the right-hand side of the building that had burned but stayed upright, the left-hand side of the building that had stayed upright, and then the center portion that will crumble, shaded in gray. All three of those are melded together to give you a complete view of the E-ring of the building. The first window I showed where my desk was is the one that's to the left of the fuselage here. And again, this window right here was Miss Minnick's, where Sandy and Cheryl and I were watching the video, and where the left engine will make penetration caddy corner just below them. The window to the right is the one that I'm actually behind, returning back from the men's restroom, heading back to my office. So in fact, what happens is the men's restroom is next to the elevator. I'm on the second floor. This is the top of the elevator shaft here. The men's restroom is next to that, but I'm down at second floor level. When I stepped out of my office, I walked through what would be the impact point, what would eventually collapse, got up to the fourth quarter, turned left into the fourth quarter, went to the men's restroom next to the elevator, came out. I'm now in front of the elevator. I'm about 5 to 7 yards behind that window, about to turn right, just a few steps from turning right back into the hallway of the E-ring to return to my office when Flight 77 makes penetration. I stand before you, being 15 to 20 yards from an 80-ton jet coming through the building at 530 miles an hour with 3,000 gallons of jet fuel. From here to basically the corner of this side of the sanctuary. I did not survive that because the Army made me the toughest guy in that building. I survived it because the toughest man to ever walk this earth 2,000 years ago had something else in mind for the Birdwell family. This was not a Governor Schwarzenegger movie where you see the flame coming down the hallway or an action adventure. You know, as a kid growing up here in Fort Worth, my brother and I, and I'm sure many of you can tell you what it was like to sit in the Ridgemar Mall parking lot when one of those B-52s took off out of Carswell heading south, and it sounded like the world was going to an end. As a field artilleryman who's commanded a medium howitzer battery, and we define medium by about a 120-pound shell. I could have used those the night of the filibuster, but that's another story. You know, because long distance is the next best thing to being there. And this was far louder than anything I'd ever experienced, whether in training or on the battlefields in the first Gulf War. It was instantaneously deafening. There would be three pains and emotions that I would experience in those moments that lasted only seconds and a few minutes that seemed to last an eternity. First was the pain of the burns. I was burned on 60% of my body, with about 40% being third-degree burns. My arms from fingertip to armpit were completely burned circularly and are completely grafted up to the armpit on both arms. My thumbs have been reconstructed with the burns to the hand area. The webbing between the thumb and the palm was burned away, and I basically had a very miniature lobster claw with the thumb joint. And Dr. Jordan went in and used the original thumb bone, obviously, but had to put in a graft between the palms to give me something of an opposing thumb. Can't shoot rifles or shotguns, but I can still handle a pistol. Thank you, Lord. My eye sockets have been rebuilt. My forehead has been completely redone. My ears are artificial cartilage with my own skin grafted over it. For the gentlemen in here, I really want you to understand how difficult it is to be the only man sitting in a plastic surgeon's waiting room. Because you can see the ladies over here that are the before picture and the ladies that are the after picture, and they're looking at me like, what are you here for? And I should have said, this is after Dr. Cohen's first attempt, and they all would have run screaming out of the room, you know. But anyway, I don't look too bad for a guy getting run over by a 757, I don't think. The most immediate life-threatening injury, though, was not the external burns, it was the internal. The aerosolized jet fuel, the temperature of what I'm breathing in. Go home, turn your oven on to somewhere between 300 and 350 degrees, and then stick your head in there for about 5 minutes. And even without black putrid petrol smoke, you'll have an idea what happens. The lungs do the same thing as your flesh does on the outside. When you touch something hot and it blisters, and you begin to get that fluid. And so what's happening on the outside is I am burning to death, and what's happening on the inside is I am very slowly beginning the process of drowning. as liquid is gathering into to my lungs. The second pain and emotion, though, is the one that truly defines the definition of terrorism. It's that panic and the terror just doesn't give it the gravity that I wish it could, but that grabs your heart when you realize you are dying a terrible death and you cannot escape the source of that death, and you know that your struggle is not to survive, but how long will your life last as you're waiting to die. I struggled to get up because of the concussion and the blast and the vacuum with that explosion occurring so close to me. My sense of balance was terribly destroyed. I could get to all fours, hands and knees, and then try to get up, but was unsuccessful, continued to fall over because, again, the sense of balance is just gone. And then eventually I came to that point where I did what we in the military are never trained to do, and that's surrender. I quit, I gave up, and I cried out in a loud voice, "Jesus, I'm coming to see you." It wasn't, "Lord, save me from this calamity." I was past that point in my heart. It was now just simply a matter of recognizing that at age 10 in 1971, I'd made the decision to accept the Lord as my Savior and the plan for God's redemption of mankind and His creation, and how the Lord is that person through which we attain that. And that I was ready to meet my Maker, collapsed to the floor, waited to die. And then the third pain and emotion, and similar to the chaos and calamity of what I had just gone through, in lying there, waiting to die, and feel that feeling of the soul departing the body, was the complete 180-degree reverse of the calamity and chaos to the peace and silence and confidence of knowing where I would spend eternity. And as I lay there waiting to hear those words, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." You know, the Lord's got a sense of humor. Of course, I didn't really realize it at the time, but I didn't get the good and faithful part. I just got the "well done" part. And so, I kid you not, when, I think many of you probably know David Barton from Wall Builders. David's been a friend now for right at 12 years now. I got to meet him shortly after September 11th, and we were in Norfolk, Virginia several years ago, and we went into Kentucky Fried Chicken. And I wasn't even thinking about it, and he said, "Oh gee, you know, I bet original recipe and extra crispy means something very different to you." And I was like, "You're just sick, man," you know. And anyway, the Lord would put the right people at the right time, training, the right place that would allow me to be with you today. Because the sprinkler system had engaged and extinguished the flame that was consuming me, I was still conscious, which I think is in and of itself a miracle, because had I not been, then I don't think there's any way Bill and Roy could have gotten to me. But four men, as I staggered down the hallway, I used the wall that I've been blown up against to get myself upright, using the wall as a third and fourth point of contact with my hands. And I can see the flesh that's hanging from the arms. I am terribly indisposed. Only my leather belt, my leather shoes, and then the front part of the shirt as I was laying face down, burning, waiting to die, is still intact, although my ID, my name tag, and my security badge are melted and still clinging to the shirt. But I am covered in my own blood because my skin has been burned off and I am bleeding profusely everywhere. Otherwise, I am indisposed. As I stagger down the hallway, I come across four men after about 25, 30 yards in this condition. Bill McKinnon, Roy Wallace, John Davies, and Chuck Knobloch. And Bill McKinnon I knew. Bill and I had been classmates together at Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth. Classmates at Leavenworth, let me make sure I say that. Particularly for those of you on camera. Roy Wallace is the first one that actually sees me. Roy and them come out of the B-ring doors into the hallway, trying to get to their coworkers. They were not looking for me directly, but Roy sees me coming out of the smoke and the fire behind me. And Bill, Chuck, and John come out shortly right after him. And Roy says, "We've got one out here." And in my exhaustion of having covered 25, 30 yards in the condition that I described, as well as the relief of knowing that I'm now going to turn over whatever decisions occur in my life to 4 of my colleagues, 1 of which I knew, 3 of which I did not. I collapsed in front of Roy. This was not a place to tarry and wait for medical care to get to me, because the fire is still burning. So, alarms are going off. In fact, the fire protection door, the sealing door, the sealant that seals the fire off at the A-ring was already closed. And so had Bill, Roy, Chuck, and John not even come into the hallway, I would have gone down to the A-ring door and either died of wounds or died of asphyxiation, because there was no way to open it unless a fireman came through it. Bill, Roy, Chuck, and John, in their haste to move me, each grab a limb and give that first exertion to pick me up. And I don't come with them. What in fact happens, they rip parts of my flesh off, and I begin screaming at them to leave me alone, because it's like that paraffin treatment when you stick your arm or a hand in the wax, and as the wax cools and solidifies, it just peels right off. With a critical burn, any burn, the liquid is what actually holds you together, and it is evaporated out of the body, and so the skin just peels right off. And so Bill, Roy, Chuck, and John, knowing that they've got to move me, essentially, Chuck is a pretty big fellow, rolls me over on the left-hand side, grabs my shoulder and upper torso area, rolls me over, forcibly puts his arms under my back, removing more of the flesh of the back as it had been laying, and I'm screaming at them to leave me alone. And eventually, what Bill, Roy, Chuck, and John do is grip hands with each other, that instead of gripping or grasping me, they shake hands with each other with my body weight resting on their connected arms. They will carry me through the B-ring door they came out of into an access way into the A-ring, and I'll be taken to the intersection of the 5th and 6th quarter, where I'll receive my first medical care from a great Air Force doctor named John Baxter. And as an Army guy, it's really hard to say great and Air Force in the same sentence, okay? So for you Air Force veterans out there who, I'm sorry, if I'm going to talk to the Air Force, let me get up a little bit. From 30,000 feet go, gee, it looks like it sucks down there. That's just kind of how we Army guys view the Air Force. Dr. Baxter, I am unrecognizable to Bill. When I called out to Bill, gave him Mel's phone number, call Mel, but I'm unrecognizable to him. And as Dr. Baxter comes beside me, wonderful lady from the Navy, Natalie Ogletree, kneels down to pray with me. I gave her my phone number. Bill had the phone number, and that's when he knew who I was. I was so badly scorched with either, the charring of the burns directly to themselves, the charring of the blood that I was bleeding out that is darkened. When Dr. Baxter went to apply the morphine and the IV, he had to take my leather shoes off that were protecting the tops of my feet and apply those in the veins in the top of by the toes. And that was when he realized I was Caucasian. I'd eventually be taken to Georgetown University Hospital, and this is really where I know in my heart that while the Lord's put all these folks in my life, that the most important person He put in my life in that moment was Dr. Michael Williams. Dr. Williams had spent 2 years in a trauma fellowship over at the Washington Hospital Center before he became the director of trauma at Georgetown. And the French ambassador lives across the street from the emergency room from Georgetown, and in Georgetown, that's where all the senators live, and it's not the inner city problem area that most of DC has. It's the upper income area, but I'd come in as a train wreck that they normally didn't see. It was usually some senator's kid or judge's kid or whatever. No disparagement to judges' kids, because I have a niece and a nephew, Wade, so no disparagement to judges' kids. But I arrive, and I'm the only casualty that gets to Georgetown, so I have the entire hospital's undivided attention. Dr. Williams, in that fellowship that he had spent 2 years at Washington Hospital Center, was under the direction of Marion Jordan and James Jang. Marion Jordan, the director of the Washington Hospital Center Burn Unit, and Dr. Jang is chief of research. So from the perspective of all the emergency rooms throughout DC, I've got the third best doctor available to deal with burns. Because normally in an emergency room, it's airway, breathing, circulation. Once those three are stabilized, you're evacuated to specialized care. But the seminal problem for me was, one, there's no burn center in Georgetown. It's over across town off of North Capitol. More importantly, when Flight 77 makes penetration to the Pentagon, Just a few moments after that, Vice President Cheney in the White House Situation Room turns to Secretary of Transportation Mineta and tells him to shut down all airspace in the United States. And that's when all the aircraft begin, and that includes medevac helicopters in D.C. I'll remain at Georgetown for 5 hours, and Dr. Williams will begin to do the very terrible things that have to be done to critical burn survivors. The escharotomies, the debridement process, the excisions. If you remember the first Rocky movie where he tells Mick to cut his eyes because he's so swollen so that it drains the blood, I am blowing up like a basketball. And there are slashes that he's going to put down my back, down my legs, down my arms, the length of them, to basically drain me, to keep me from exploding. Prior to him anesthetizing me, I'll ask to do 2 things. Major John Collison had accompanied me in the back of that Ford from the Pentagon. I didn't ride in an ambulance, I just rode in a privately owned vehicle. Got to Georgetown. John I knew, and again, John didn't recognize me, he just was helping load me and had the toe tag. And since I was the only Birdwell in the Pentagon, he knew who it was. I asked for John to take the wedding ring off my finger, because normally what happens in a burn unit, if you've got jewelry that's part of the burn, I mean, gold doesn't melt till 700 or 800 degrees. My hand had melted long before the ring had. And so normally it's cut off the survivor, whether it's a ring, bracelet, necklace, if that's the part of the body burned. As the body is swelling and the jewelry isn't swelling, the jewelry forms a tourniquet. I didn't want the ring destroyed, and so I'd asked John to take the wedding ring off and give it to Mel and tell her that I loved her. Because through the symbolism of that wedding ring, I'm saying goodbye to my wife and my son. And a wonderful OBGYN nurse who had answered the all-hands-on-deck call, Judith Rogers, reaches for the ring. A portion of it is, it's melted to the ring isn't melted, but my hand is melted to the ring. My fingers look like hot dogs that you blackened on the grill. The ring is there. She gives it a slight tug and it degloves the remainder of the ring finger, takes the flesh that's hanging and a portion of the back of the palm and the base of the hand. And I don't recall it hurting, and I don't think so much because of Dr. Baxter's morphine shot, but because I was concentrating on the dignity of the death. I knew that I was dying. And then I asked for the hospital chaplain. Chaplain Cirillo came and just said a simple prayer, recognizing that this was not what faith was I going to be. Again, that was firm at age 10. This was simply recognizing whose picture hangs above the president's and my chain of command photos of life and my eternity. And it was just simply a prayer that said, Lord, if you got Dr. Williams' hand and the team here, and Brian survives, we'll salute that flag and move out with that mission. But if you brought Brian here under the peace and quiet and comfort and the care of his fellow Americans, you quietly call him into eternity, we'll salute that flag too. And when that prayer was over with, it was with the strength not of a soldier, but of my faith in Christ, that I could look at Dr. Williams and very laboredly say, let's get on with it, knowing of who was in charge in that room. And that would be the first of many, many difficult circumstances that Mel and I and our family would face. Let me close, before I take questions, let me close with this thought. We're now 12 years from that day. People have asked, I've been doing the radio interviews and the like as we're coming up to the memorial. People have asked, has America forgotten? I said, have they forgotten the events of that day and the lives lost? No. But I do think what we've forgotten is the capacity for evil from an enemy that is a culture that loves death, that recruited, bred, trained, deployed, and financed people that believe it completely rational to fly planes into buildings or drive dinghies into our destroyers in Yemen or wherever you want to name, all the way back to 1973 with our first American bastard being taken hostage and killed, Cleo Noel in Sudan, right after the Munich Olympics, just a year after the Munich Olympics. We've been fighting terrorism since then. The other thing I know that this nation has not forgotten, and a particular thank you to those of you that served in Vietnam. You deserve a thanks, not just for your service, just like every other soldier that served in every other conflict or put the uniform on in time of peace and was ready to be in conflict. But our nation has learned the lesson and didn't forget the lesson of Vietnam, and that is, soldiers come home, they receive a welcome, and because of what you didn't receive, generations today, regardless of where you think we are in the national security battles and the like, a soldier that goes and serves gets an appropriate thank you and welcome home, and isn't the one paying the liability for political decisions. The soldier was the one that was dutiful and faithful and true, and he's to be recognized for that. So thank you.